Man mocks boy in court until he decides to show his legal knowledge. Jack Wilson felt sweat trickle down his palms as a loud laugh echoed through the courtroom. The lawyer in a dark grey suit pointed at him with a mocking grin, as if witnessing the funniest joke of the year. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a tasteless joke," said Dr. Richard Thompson, gesturing dramatically. "A 12-year-old boy trying to face me in court? This is a circus, not justice." Jack's chest tightened, but he didn't lower his gaze. He adjusted the blue shirt his mother had ironed so carefully the night before and took a deep breath. He knew this moment would come, knew he'd be humiliated before even speaking, but he also knew something Dr. Thompson couldn't even imagine. Judge Barbara Miller slammed her gavel hard, demanding silence in the packed room. Jack glanced back and saw his mother, Susan, sitting in the front row, her eyes red from crying. Beside her was his younger sister, Emma Rose, just 8 years old, clutching a drawing she'd made for good luck. "Dr. Thompson, the minor has the right to defend himself under the Child and Adolescent Protection Act," the judge said firmly. "And as requested by the family, he will represent himself in this hearing." The lawyer rolled his eyes and returned to his table, where he shuffled through an impressive stack of documents. Across the room, Jack had only an old folder he'd found in the trash and some papers printed at the neighborhood internet cafe. "Very well," the judge continued. "We are here to rule on the eviction lawsuit filed by Mr. Anthony Thompson against the Wilson family. Dr. Richard, you may begin." A shiver ran down Jack's spine when he heard the last name. Anthony Thompson was the lawyer's father. This was no coincidence. It was a family scheme to take the home he'd lived in with his mother and sister for over 10 years. Dr. Richard stood pompously, adjusted his expensive tie, and began his speech. He used complicated words, cited legal articles Jack had never heard, and gestured as if performing in a play. With every sentence, he glanced at Jack with that same mocking smile. "Your Honor, the case is simple," the lawyer said, opening a genuine leather folder. "My client, Mr. Anthony Thompson, is the rightful owner of the property located at 247 Maple Street. The Wilson family has been illegally occupying the premises for years, with no proof of ownership." Jack knew this was a lie. His family had lived in that house since before he was born. His grandmother had bought the land in the 80s and built the house brick by brick. But when she passed 5 years ago, all the documents mysteriously vanished. "Furthermore," Dr. Richard continued, "the defendants have never paid property taxes, never registered the deed, and possess no documents proving purchase. This is a classic case of private property invasion." Jack's mother started to rise, but he subtly motioned for her to stay seated. He knew anything she said now would be used against them. "To conclude, Your Honor," the lawyer said, now pacing the room like he owned it, "my client is eager to reclaim his property. He needs to sell it to cover urgent medical expenses." Jack's nearly stood up right then. That was the biggest lie he'd ever heard. Anthony Thompson owned 3 houses in the city's upscale neighborhood and drove an imported car. What medical treatment could he possibly need? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. The judge made some notes and looked at Jack with an expression that mixed curiosity and concern. It was rare to see such a young child in a courtroom, let alone representing his own family in something as serious as an eviction case. "Jack Wilson," said the judge, "now it's your turn to present your defense." The boy stood up slowly, feeling his legs tremble. Dr. Richard chuckled again, quieter this time but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your Honor," Jack began, his voice steadier than he expected, "I'd like to start by challenging Dr. Richard's claims." "Tell us, Jack," said the judge, leaning slightly forward. "First, our family didn't break into the house. We lived there because my grandmother, Mary Wilson, bought the land in 1984 from Mr. Joseph Green. I have here a copy of the purchase receipt I found among my grandmother's belongings." Jack pulled a yellowed, time-worn paper from his folder. Dr. Richard stopped laughing and leaned in to get a better look. "Second," Jack continued, "we've always paid the taxes. My mother has all the receipts from the last 10 years. What happened was that after my grandmother passed away, Someone went to the city hall and changed the owner's name in the records, but the taxes were still paid by us. The lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is absurd. A child can't present documents without proper authentication. Besides, anyone could forge an old receipt. Jack felt his blood boil. This was exactly what he'd expected. Dr. Richard was showing his true colors, someone who used technicalities to hide the truth. Dr. Richard, Jack said, turning to face the lawyer, you just made a very serious mistake. What do you mean, boy? The lawyer replied with disdain. You said anyone could forge an old receipt. But if you look closely at the document your father presented as proof of the land purchase, you'll see it's much newer than mine. Jack watched Dr. Richard's face turn red. He'd spent weeks studying every document in the case and found something even the experienced lawyer had missed. Your father's receipt is dated 1984, but it was printed on a laser printer. Those printers only arrived in the United States in 1987. Plus, the paper has a watermark from the Westfield factory, which only started producing this type of paper in 1989. A murmur spread through the room. The judge called for silence and asked to examine both documents. Jack handed over his grandmother's receipt, handwritten in blue ballpoint pen, typical of the 80s. Dr. Richard tried to compose himself, but Jack could see sweat forming on his forehead. Your Honor, the lawyer said, even if there are discrepancies in the documents, the fact remains that the family has no property deed on record. Without that, there's no right to possession. Jack had been waiting for this argument too. It was the most technical and the hardest to counter, but he hadn't spent 2 years studying law at the public library for nothing. Dr. Richard, Jack said, opening his worn folder, you're referring to Article 1245 of the Civil Code, which deals with property registration. But there's something called urban adverse possession, regulated by Article 183 of the Constitution. The lawyer blinked several times, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. To establish urban adverse possession, Jack continued, the family must live on the property continuously and peacefully for at least 5 years, without opposition from the owner. My family has lived in the house for over 10 years, always. Paid taxes, improved the property, and no one ever questioned our possession until now. But, Dr. Richard stammered, adverse possession has to be declared in court. You never filed this lawsuit. Jack smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. That's true, Counselor, but there's also the non-judicial adverse possession process, regulated by Public Law 93-288 of 2017. And 3 months ago, my mother initiated the process at the Property Registry Office. The shock on the lawyer's face was so evident that even some people in the audience chuckled quietly. Jack pulled out a copy of the stamped and signed registry receipt from his folder. Judge Barbara Miller examined the document with growing attention. Jack could see in her eyes that she was impressed not only by his legal knowledge, but by the organization and planning behind his entire defense. Mr. Richard, said the judge, I'd like you to clarify how your client obtained the property documentation if the Wilson family had been in peaceful possession of the property for over a decade. The lawyer loosened his tie and glanced nervously at his father, who sat in the second row with an angry expression. Your Honor, my client, well, Mr. Richard seemed to have lost all the eloquence he'd shown earlier in the hearing. Jack saw his opportunity and decided to press further. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to present one more piece of evidence. During my research, I discovered that Mr. Anthony Thompson has been a real estate agent in this city for over 20 years. He knows very well how property and adverse possession laws work. Where are you going with this, Jack? The judge asked. I'm saying he knew our family had a rightful claim to the house through adverse possession. But he waited until my grandmother passed to take advantage of the situation. He thought a widowed woman with 2 young children wouldn't know how to defend herself. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Jack heard someone mutter, "That's outrageous," from the back. His mother was crying, but now they were tears of emotion and pride. Anthony Thompson abruptly stood from his seat. "That's a lie! I bought that house from the real owner," he shouted. "Mr. Thompson," the judge said sternly, "sit down and remain silent or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Jack watched Anthony's reaction and noticed something important. The man had said, "real owner," not previous owner or legal owner. It was as if he knew there had been another owner before. "Your Honor," Jack said, "may I ask Mr. Anthony Thompson a question?" Mr. Richard quickly stood up. "Objection. The minor has no authority to question witnesses." "Actually," Jack said calmly, "Article 212 of the Civil Procedure Code allows parties to ask direct questions when representing themselves. Since I don't have a lawyer, I'm representing my family." The judge quickly consulted a law book and nodded. "You may ask your question, Jack." Jack turned to Anthony and stared directly at him. "Mr. Anthony, did you know my grandmother, Mary Wilson?" "No, I've never seen that woman in my life," Anthony snapped. "Are you sure?" Jack pressed. "Absolutely." Jack opened his folder and pulled out an old yellowed photograph. "Then how do you explain this picture from 1987, where you're standing talking to my grandmother on the porch of our house?" The room fell completely silent. Jack had found the photo in a box of his grandmother's belongings the week before, and it had taken him days to identify the younger man in the picture. Anthony Thompson turned pale. Mr. Richard looked completely lost. That could be anyone," Anthony muttered. "In the photo, you're wearing a badge from the real estate agency where you worked," Jack said. "And my grandmother wrote on the back, 'Mr. Anthony Realtor offered to buy the house I refused March 15, 1987. The judge asked to examine the photo. As she studied it, Jack continued his argument. "This proves that Mr. Anthony knew, since 1987, that my grandmother was the owner of the house. He tried to buy it. She refused, and now, after she passed away, he's trying to take by force what he couldn't obtain legally." Dr. Richard tried once more to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, even if my client knew Mrs. Mary, that doesn't change the fact that he has valid property documents." Jack was prepared for this last move, too. "Doctor, may I see those documents?" The lawyer hesitated, but Judge Barbara authorized it. Jack examined the papers carefully, just as he'd seen lawyers do on TV. "These documents say Mr. Anthony bought the house from Joseph Green in 2018, said Jack. "But Joseph Green sold the land to my grandmother in 1984. How could he sell the same property twice?" "Well, perhaps," Dr. Richard was clearly flustered. "Unless," Jack continued, "Mr. Joseph Green didn't know he'd sold it to my grandmother because someone withheld that information from him. Someone who worked in real estate and knew how to find elderly people who might have lost their documents." The accusation was serious. Jack was suggesting that Anthony had deceived Joseph Green, making him believe he still owned land he'd sold decades earlier. Judge Barbara looked sternly at Anthony Thompson. "Mr. Anthony, would you like to clarify these matters?" But before he could answer, the courtroom door opened and an elderly man entered, leaning on a cane. "Excuse me, Your Honor," the man said. "My name is Joseph Green and I need to speak about this property. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story." The mood in the room shifted completely with Joseph Green's unexpected arrival. Jack saw Anthony Thompson grow even paler, if that was possible. Dr. Richard looked like a fish out of water, opening and closing his mouth without a word. "Mr. Green," said Judge Barbara, "you weren't listed as a witness in this hearing." "I know, Your Honor," Joseph replied, still catching his breath from the walk. "But when I heard about this hearing, I had to come. I can't let an injustice happen." Jack felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He hadn't planned for this intervention and didn't know if it would help or hurt his family. "You may speak, Mr. Green," said the judge. "Your Honor, it's true that I sold that land twice," Joseph said, his voice shaky but firm. "First to Mrs. Mary Wilson in 1984, then to Mr. Anthony Thompson in 2018. A murmur of surprise filled the room. Jack hadn't expected this confession. "But I only made the second sale because Mr. Anthony deceived me," Joseph continued. "He told me Mrs. Mary had passed away without heirs and that the city was about to seize the land for abandonment. He said if I didn't sell to him quickly, I'd lose everything without compensation." Jack felt a wave of anger rush through him. Anthony had lied to Joseph, even using the family's grief over their grandmother's death as a manipulation tool. "Mr. Green," Jack said, standing up, "do you have any proof of this conversation?" Joseph pulled an old phone from his pocket. "Better than that, son. I have the recording." Dr. Richard jumped from his seat. "Objection! Unauthorized." Recordings can't be used as evidence. Jack had studied this too. "Actually, doctor," he said, "Public Law 93-288 allows personal recordings for the defense of rights. Mr. Green was defending his property against false information. Judge Barbara authorized the recording to be played." Anthony Thompson's voice echoed through the room, clear and unmistakable. "Mr. Green, you need to sell that land right away. The woman who lived there passed away and left no family. The city already has its eye on it to seize it for abandonment. If you sell it to me now, you can still get good money. If you wait any longer, you'll lose everything." The silence after the recording was deafening. Jack looked at Anthony and saw a defeated man. Dr. Richard was nervously shuffling papers, clearly searching for a way out that didn't exist. "Mr. Thompson," said the judge, her voice heavy with disapproval, "do you have anything to say about this recording?" Anthony Thompson stood slowly, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a great weight. "Your Honor, I needed the money. My wife was sick and—" His voice came out weak, barely a whisper. "Hold on," Jack interrupted. "You just admitted you lied to Mr. Green, but at the start of the hearing, your son said you needed to sell the house to pay for urgent medical treatment." Jack turned to Dr. Richard. "Doctor, your wife passed away 3 years ago. I checked the civil registry. How could your father be paying for treatment for someone who's already gone?" The lie was exposed so plainly that even the people in the gallery began murmuring in outrage. Dr. Richard tried one last time to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, even if there were irregularities in the second sale, that doesn't automatically void my client's rights." Jack knew this was the lawyer's last move, and he was ready for it. "Dr. Thompson," Jack said, "you're right, the second sale doesn't automatically cancel, but there's something called substantial error in the Civil Code, Article 139. When someone is deceived about essential facts of the deal, the sale can be voided. Furthermore," Jack continued, "Article 147 of the same code addresses fraud, which is when someone uses tricks to deceive another person. Mr. Thompson clearly misled Mr. Green with false information." The judge was taking rapid notes. Jack could see she was impressed by his knowledge, but also concerned about the legal complexity of the case. "Jack," said the judge, "even if we prove the irregularities in the second sale, there's still the matter of the title. How does your family intend to establish rightful ownership of the property?" This was the moment Jack had feared most, the most technical and complicated part of the whole process. "Your Honor," he said, "in addition to the ongoing non-judicial adverse possession claim, we're requesting the second sale be voided due to fraud and substantial error. With that, Mr. Green would once again be the legal owner, and he's already confirmed he sold it to my grandmother in 1984. "But how do you prove that first sale without a recorded deed?" asked the judge. Jack smiled and pulled more documents from his folder. "Your Honor, my grandmother may not have registered the purchase at the county office, but she was very organized. I have tax payment receipts dating back to 1985, proof of home improvements, utility bills always paid on time, and witnesses who can confirm she lived there. Besides," Joseph Green said, standing again, "I can testify that I sold it to Mrs. Mary. I even have a copy of the receipt I made at the time." Jack felt a wave of relief, but knew the battle wasn't over yet. Dr. Richard wouldn't give up easily. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "even if there were irregularities, my client acted in good faith. He paid for the land believing it was a legal transaction." "Doctor," Jack replied, "good faith assumes the person was unaware of any wrongdoing, but we've already proven your father knew my grandmother since 1987 and knew she was the rightful owner of the house. He couldn't claim ignorance about something he'd known for over 30 years. Jack's argument was so spot on that Dr. Richard finally gave up contesting it. He sank heavily into his chair and began gathering his papers. But Jack knew this victory in court was just the beginning. Anthony Thompson wouldn't easily give up a property in the heart of the city. He'd surely try other appeals, other ways to complicate the Wilsons' lives. "Very well," said Judge Barbara Miller. "Considering all the evidence presented, I'll suspend the eviction proceedings until the matter of the property's ownership is resolved. Mr. Joseph Green, you'll need to file a lawsuit to nullify the second sale. Wilson family, you may remain in the property until the final decision. Jack's legs nearly gave way. It wasn't the complete victory he'd hoped for, but it was far better than being evicted that day. His mother rushed to hug him, tears streaming down her face. "My boy, my dear boy," she whispered in his ear, "you saved our family." His little sister, Emma Rose, ran to join the embrace, clutching the drawing she'd made for good luck. "Jack, you are amazing," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. But Jack glanced over his shoulder and saw Anthony Thompson speaking quietly with his son. Their expressions weren't those of men who'd given up. They were plotting their next move. As the family left the courthouse, Jack felt a mix of relief and worry. They'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. Outside, Joseph Green caught up to them. "Son," the elderly man said, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder, "you were brilliant today, but I must warn you, Anthony won't back down easily. He's vindictive and has the money to hire the best lawyers." "I know, Mr. Joseph," Jack replied, "but we have the truth on our side." "The truth isn't always enough, my boy," Joseph said with a sad look. "Sometimes those with more money can twist even the truth." Jack knew Joseph was right. In the coming days, Anthony Thompson would show his true colors, and Jack would have to be ready to defend his family, not just in court, but in every aspect of their lives. That night, as they ate around the small kitchen table, Susan looked at her son with a mix of pride and concern. "Jack, where did you learn all this?" she asked. "At the library, Mom," he answered. "After Grandma passed and these problems with the house started, I realized no one was going to help us. So I began studying law books at the library." "But sweetheart, you're only 12. How did you understand such complicated things?" Jack sighed. He didn't know how to explain to his mother that he'd spent the last 2 years living at the library, reading everything about property rights, adverse possession, and legal procedures, that he'd memorized entire sections of the Civil Code and the Constitution, that he'd lost his childhood to become the family's protector. "I didn't have a choice, Mum," he said simply. Emma Rose, who'd been quiet during dinner, finally spoke up. "Jack, what happens now?" "Now we fight," Jack answered, taking his sister's hand. "And we'll win." But even as he said it, Jack knew the next few months would be the hardest of his life. Anthony Thompson wasn't just a greedy man. He was desperate, having staked too much on that property. And desperate men are capable of anything. The next morning, Jack woke to the sound of raised voices at their front door. Peering out the window, he saw 2 men in suits talking to his mother on the porch. From the tone, it wasn't good news. Jack dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find out what was happening. "Ty, good morning," he said, standing beside his mother. "Ah, you must be the prodigy," said one of the men with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm attorney Robert Harris, Mr. Anthony Thompson's new lawyer." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. If Anthony had changed lawyers the day after the hearing, it meant he was taking the case much more seriously now. "I'm here to make an offer," Attorney Harris continued. "My client is willing to buy your house for a fair price. You could use the money to buy another property and avoid all this legal hassle." "We have nothing to sell," Jackie replied firmly. "The house is ours." "Ah, but that's still up for debate, isn't it?" said the lawyer. "And lawsuits can drag on for years. Do you have the money to sustain a prolonged legal battle?" The question hit Jack like a punch to the gut. They barely had enough to eat, let alone pay for lawyers and court fees. "Besides," Attorney Harris went on, "my client is considering filing additional lawsuits, perhaps a claim for emotional distress since you publicly accused him of dishonesty, or maybe an investigation into how a minor gained access to documents that should be in official records." The threats were clear. Anthony wasn't just fighting for the house, he was willing to destroy the Wilson family in the process. "Attorney Harris," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady, "your threats don't scare us. We have a right to our home and we'll fight for it." "Very well," the lawyer said, handing over a business card. "When you change your mind, call me. But remember, with each passing day, the offer may shrink." After the men left, Susan sat on the porch and began to cry. "Jack, I can't take this anymore," she said. Maybe we should take the money and leave. Mom, we can't give up now, Jack replied, sitting beside her. The house is rightfully ours. Grandma worked her whole life to build that place for us. But son, they have money, lawyers, influence. What do we have? Jack looked at the house where he was born, where he'd taken his first steps, where all his memories of Grandma lived. He looked at his mother, who worked as a cleaner to support the family, and at Emma Rose, watching them from the window with worried eyes. We have the truth, he finally said, and we have each other. But that night, alone in the room he shared with his sister, Jack allowed himself to feel fear for the first time since it all began. Anthony Thompson had shown he was willing to use every resource at his disposal, and Jack was just a 12-year-old boy with legal knowledge learned from library books. How could he face seasoned lawyers, private investigators, and the entire legal machine Anthony's money could buy? Jack picked up the civil code book he'd borrowed from the library and began reading by the dim light of a small lamp. If Anthony wanted a war, he'd get a war. But it would be a war where every statute, every comma of case law would be a weapon in the hands of a boy fighting for his family. The following Monday, Jack was at the library when the librarian, Mrs. Helen, approached him with a worried expression. Jack, my boy, she said quietly, some men came here asking about you. They wanted to know what books you read, how long you've been coming here, things like that. Jack's stomach dropped. Anthony was investigating him, looking for a way to discredit his legal knowledge. What did you tell them? I said user information is confidential, Mrs. Helen replied. But they insisted. They even offered money. Jack knew he was being cornered. Anthony wasn't just attacking legally, he was attacking personally, trying to find some vulnerability he could exploit. Mrs. Helen, said Jack, can I ask you a favor? Of course, dear. If those men come back, could you let me know? Certainly. But Jack, you're getting into something very dangerous. Maybe you should talk to your parents. That's exactly who I'm talking to, Jack replied. I'm doing this for my family. But Mrs. Helen was right. Jack was getting into something much bigger than he realized. Anthony Thompson wasn't just a greedy man. He had connections, resources, and a network of contacts Jack couldn't even imagine. That afternoon, when Jack got home, he found his mother talking to an elegant woman in the living room. Jack, said Susan, this is Dr. Carly Peterson, a social worker. She came to ask a few questions. Jack felt his blood run cold. Social workers only showed up when someone questioned a parent's ability to care for their child. Hello, Jack, Dr. Carly said with a professional smile. I'm here because we received an anonymous report that you might be experiencing educational neglect. What do you mean? Jack asked. Well, it seems you've been spending a lot of time studying subjects inappropriate for your age and skipping school to visit libraries and courthouses. That's concerning for a 12-year-old. Jack immediately understood what was happening. Anthony was using the system against him, turning his greatest strength, legal knowledge, into a weapon against his own family. Dr. Carly, Jack said. Calmly, I attend school regularly, my grades are excellent, and I study law in my free time because it's a personal interest. But Jack, children shouldn't worry about complex legal matters. That's the responsibility of adults. And when adults fail, Jack replied, someone has to take responsibility. Dr. Carly made several notes in her report. Jack knew every word he said was being analyzed, every gesture interpreted as evidence of possible neglect. Mrs. Susan, the social worker said, I need to know, do you encourage your son to study law? Well, Susan was clearly nervous. Jack has always been very bright. He studies because he wants to. But don't you think it would be better for him to focus on typical childhood activities, playing, making friends his own age? Jack saw the trap closing. If his mother said yes, she'd be admitting he was being deprived of a normal childhood. If she said no, it would seem like she was forcing him into adult responsibilities. Dr. Carly, Jack interrupted, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you know the Child and Adolescent Protection Act? Yes, I do. Then you know Article 53 guarantees a child's right to knowledge, and Article 58 states the right to participate in community life. So I'm exercising my constitutional rights. Dr. Carley seemed surprised by his answer but kept writing. Jack, do you understand that a child needs protection, that you shouldn't be dealing with adult conflicts? I do, Jack replied, but I also understand that when my family is being threatened with eviction, I have the right to defend myself. Article 227 of the Constitution talks about protecting children, but it also mentions dignity and the right to housing. The social worker fell silent for a moment, clearly impressed by Jack's knowledge but also troubled by the situation. Very well, she finally said. I'll complete my report and return soon. In the meantime, I recommend Jack receives psychological support to handle the stress of this situation. After she left, Susan collapsed onto the couch. Jack, they're going to try to take you away from me, she said, crying. They won't, Mom, replied Jack, hugging her. We won't let them. But inside, Jack was scared. Anthony had found a new way to attack, by questioning their family structure and his mother's ability to care for the children. It was a low blow, but effective. Emma Rose appeared in the living room, still wearing her school uniform. Jack, what's going on? Why is Mom crying? Nothing serious, Emma, Jack answered. Just some problems we'll solve. But Emma Rose was sharper than she looked. This is about the house, isn't it? She asked. Jack sighed. He didn't want to drag his sister deeper into this, but he couldn't lie to her either. Yes, the man who wants to take our house is trying other ways to hurt us. And what are we going to do? Jack looked at the two most important people in his life. His mother, who worked so hard to support the family, and his little sister, who trusted him to protect them. At that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. We're going to fight back, he said. That night, Jack stayed up late planning his next move. If Anthony wanted to use the system against them, Jack would use the system in their favor. The next morning, Jack went to the library early and asked Miss Helen to help him use the computer. He had a plan, but needed information only the internet could provide. Jack, what are you looking for? Asked Miss Helen. Information about Dr. Robert Harris and Mr. Anthony Thompson, Jack replied. If they're investigating our family, we have the right to investigate them too. Miss Helen hesitated for a moment, but ended up helping Jack navigate search sites. What they found was revealing. Dr. Robert Harris had been suspended from the Bar Association 2 years earlier for unethical practices. The suspension had been overturned on appeal, but the accusations were serious: witness coercion and evidence tampering. Jack, said Miss Helen, this is very serious. You need to tell someone. I will, Miss Helen, but first I need more information. Jack spent the rest of the morning researching Anthony Thompson. He discovered that Anthony had been involved in at least 3 similar cases over the past 10 years, always buying properties from elderly people under questionable circumstances. In one case, an 80-year-old woman had sold her home to Anthony for far less than it was worth after he convinced her that her children no longer wanted to visit because the house was in terrible condition. After the sale, it came out that Anthony had paid her children to stay away from their mother for a few weeks. My God, murmured Miss Helen, reading over Jack's shoulder. This man is a predator. Jack printed every document he could find. He was sure this information would be useful, but he still didn't know how to use it. When he got home that evening, another problem was waiting for him. His mother was in the kitchen holding a piece of paper and crying again. What is it, Mom? This came today, she said, handing the paper to Jack. It was a court summons. Anthony had filed a lawsuit for emotional damages, claiming the accusations made during the hearing had harmed his professional reputation. He was demanding $50,000 in compensation. Jack's legs nearly gave out. $50,000 was more money than his family would see in a lifetime. If they lost this case, they'd be in debt forever. Jack, what are we going to do? Asked Susan. We don't even have money for a lawyer, let alone this compensation. Jack read the summons twice, analyzing every word. Anthony wasn't just trying to take the house. He was trying to financially destroy the family. Mom, said Jack, we're going to fight back. I'll study civil law and we'll respond to this lawsuit. But son, you're a minor. You can't represent the family in a civil case. Jack had forgotten that detail. In family disputes like the eviction, He could represent himself with his mother's permission, but in civil cases involving third parties, he needed a lawyer. "Then we'll find a lawyer," Jack said. "There has to be someone willing to help us." But Jack knew it wouldn't be easy. Lawyers were expensive, and few would risk going up against someone with Anthony Thompson's resources for a family with no money. That night, Emma Rose knocked on Jack's bedroom door. "Can I come in?" "Of course, Emma." She sat on the bed, beside her brother, her face serious. "Jack, I heard you talking with Mom. Are we going to lose the house?" Jack looked at his little sister and saw the same fear in her eyes that he felt. But he also saw trust. Emma Rose believed he could fix everything. "We're not losing it, Emma," Jack said. "I promise." "How can you be sure?" Jack took a deep breath before answering. "Because I won't give up. No matter what happens, I'll fight to the end." Emma Rose hugged him tightly. "I believe in you, Jack. You're the bravest brother in the world." After she went to sleep, Jack was left alone with his thoughts. He knew he was promising something he might not be able to deliver. Anthony had all the resources, all the connections, all the experience. Jack had only determination and book knowledge. But there was one thing Anthony didn't have. Jack knew the pain of someone who could lose everything, and that made him stronger than any expensive lawyer. The next morning, Jack made a decision that even surprised himself. He decided to seek help where he least expected to find it, in the very system Anthony was using against them. Jack went to the city courthouse and looked for the public defender's office. That was where people without resources could get free legal help. The public defender who assisted him was a young woman, about 30, who looked as overworked as every government employee Jack had ever met. "Hello, I'm attorney Fiona Coleman," she said. "How can I help you?" Jack explained. The whole situation, the eviction, the hearing, and now the lawsuit for emotional damages. Attorney Coleman listened carefully, taking notes. "Jack, you defended yourself well at the hearing," she said. "But this new lawsuit is more complicated. Anthony Thompson is claiming you publicly slandered him." "But we only told the truth," Jack protested. "I know, but proving the truth in court is different from knowing the truth. We need evidence, witnesses, documents." Jack pulled out all the information he had researched about Anthony at the library. "I have this," he said, handing the papers to Attorney Coleman. She examined the documents with growing interest. "Jack, this is very good. It shows a pattern of behavior. But we still need to prove the specific accusations you made are true. How do we do that? We need to find other victims of Anthony, people who can testify that he uses the same methods." Jack felt a spark of hope. He had finally found someone who understood the situation and was willing to help. "Attorney Coleman, can I help look for these people?" "Yes, you can, but you have to be careful. If Anthony finds out you're investigating him, he might try to intimidate the witnesses." Jack knew he was already being investigated by Anthony, so there wasn't much left to lose. And the idea of being able to take action instead of just reacting to attacks energized him. "Where do we start?" "From the cases you found online. Let's try to locate the people who sold properties to Anthony in recent years." Jack left the public defender's office with renewed energy. For the first time since everything had begun, he felt he wasn't fighting alone. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Over the next week, Jack and Dr. Fiona worked like investigators. Using public records, they managed to track down 3 of the people who had sold properties to Anthony Thompson in the last 5 years. The first was Mrs. Constance, a 75-year-old woman who had sold her home in the city center for a very low price. When Jack and Dr. Fiona visited her in the small apartment where she now lived, she began to cry as she told her story. "That man tricked me," said Mrs. Constance. "He told me my house was condemned by the city, that I'd be fined if I didn't sell quickly. I was so scared I accepted whatever he offered." "Do you have any proof of these conversations?" asked Dr. Fiona. "I have the letters he sent," replied Mrs. Constance, fetching an old box. "He sent one every week, always saying the situation was getting worse." Jack examined the letters and saw they were all written to instill fear and urgency. Anthony didn't lie outright, but he twisted information to frighten the elderly woman. "Mrs. Constance," said Jack, "would you be willing to testify against Mr. Anthony?" "I would," she answered. "That man ruined my life. I lost the home where I raised my children, where my husband lived before he passed, all because of his lies." The second witness was harder to convince. Mr. Walter, an 82-year-old man, had sold a plot of land to Anthony, but was afraid of getting involved in legal trouble. "Son," said Mr. Walter, "I'm old and sick. I don't want any more trouble in my life." Jack understood the old man's fear. Anthony had surely intimidated others into silence. "Mr. Walter," said Jack, "if we don't do something, he'll keep deceiving others. More families will lose their homes like mine almost did." The emotional appeal worked. Mr. Walter agreed to testify, as long as his safety was guaranteed. The third witness was the most surprising. Mrs. Margaret Johnson hadn't sold her home to Anthony. She had resisted his pressure for 2 years until he gave up and found another victim. "That man is relentless," said Mrs. Margaret. "He showed up at my door every month with a different story. One day he'd say the neighborhood was losing value, the next that the city was planning construction that would disrupt my life. Always trying to scare me." "Why didn't you sell?" asked Jack. "Because my son is a lawyer," she replied with a smile. "When I told him about Anthony's offers, he explained it was all lies." Jack realized Anthony chose his victims carefully. Elderly, lonely people with no family to guide them. He was a predator who exploited vulnerability. With the 3 witnesses, Dr. Fiona built a defense strategy. Instead of just denying the slander accusations, they would counterattack, proving Anthony was truly dishonest. "Jack," said Dr. Fiona, we're filing a counterclaim." "What's that?" "It's when the defendant, while defending themselves, also accuses the plaintiff. We'll sue Anthony for fraud, coercion, and elder abuse." Jack felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, they were moving from defense to offense, but Anthony didn't stay idle. 2 days after Dr. Fiona filed the counterclaim, Jack was approached outside the school by a man who introduced himself as a private investigator. "Jack Wilson?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me. I need to ask you a few questions about your recent activities. I heard you've been visiting elderly people, asking about real estate deals." Jack immediately realized he was being intimidated. "I have nothing to say to you," Jack replied, trying to walk away. "Easy there, kid," the man said, blocking his path. "I just want to talk. You know intimidating witnesses is a crime, right?" The irony was glaring. The man was intimidating Jack while accusing him of intimidating witnesses. "I'm not intimidating anyone," Jack shot back. "I'm just talking to people who were deceived by Mr. Anthony Thompson." "Ah, so you admit you're investigating my client," the man said, pulling a recorder from his pocket. Jack realized he'd walked into a trap. Anything he said could be used against him. "I have nothing more to say," Jack muttered, stepping around the man and running home. When he got home, Jack told his mother and Dr. Fiona everything. She had come to visit them to discuss the case. "This is clear intimidation," Dr. Fiona said. "We'll file a police report." "Will it even help?" Jack asked. "Maybe not right away, but it creates an official record that Anthony is using illegal tactics to pressure you." Jack was starting to understand that the law worked differently in practice. It wasn't enough to be right. You had to prove it, document everything, leave an official trail. That night, Jack had a nightmare. He dreamed of coming home to find his family being evicted, all their belongings thrown into the street. In the dream, Anthony was there, laughing, saying he'd won. Jack woke up in a cold sweat and looked over at Emma Rose sleeping peacefully in the bed beside him. The sight reminded him why he was fighting. It wasn't just about the house, it was about his family's right to live in peace. The next morning, Jack made a risky decision. He decided to go straight to Mr. Robert Harris, Anthony's lawyer. Jack showed up at the lawyer's office unannounced. The receptionist tried to stop him, but he insisted so much that she finally called Mr. Harris. "What do you want here, kid?" the lawyer asked, clearly annoyed. "I want to propose a deal," Jack said. Mr. Harris laughed. "A deal? You have nothing to negotiate with." "We have more than you think," Jack replied, placing a folder on the table. Inside were all the pieces of evidence Jack and Dr. Fiona had gathered about Anthony. Past cases, witness statements, documents proving his pattern of dishonest behavior. Mr. Harris examined the papers, and Jack could see his expression gradually shift. "Where did you get this?" the lawyer asked. "Public records," Jack answered. "It's all there if you know where to look." "And what do you want?" "We want your client to drop all legal actions against my family. In return, we won't make this information public." It was a gamble. Jack was essentially blackmailing them, but with legal, truthful information. Mr. Harris was silent for several minutes, weighing the implications. "You realize what you're doing is very dangerous?" he finally said. "More dangerous than trying to evict a family from their home?" Jack countered. "My client won't accept blackmail from a child." "Then maybe he'd prefer explaining these irregularities to a public prosecutor," Jack said, standing up. "The choice is his." Jack left the office with his heart pounding. He'd gone all in on a single move. Either Anthony would back down or the conflict would escalate dangerously. The answer came the next day. Jack woke up to the sound of sirens outside. When he looked out the window, he saw a police car parked in front of his house. Jack rushed downstairs and found his mother talking to two officers on the porch. "What's going on?" Jack asked. "We received a report of a minor involved in extortion activities," one of the officers said. Jack felt his world collapse. Anthony had completely twisted the settlement proposal, turning it into a criminal accusation against him. "I didn't extort anyone," Jack said. "I just offered a settlement based on public information." "We'll need you to come with us for questioning," the officer replied. "He's a minor," Susan protested. "He needs a guardian. You can come along." Jack found himself being taken away in a police car like a criminal. Neighbors peered out their windows to see what was happening. Emma Rose stood at her doorstep, crying. At the station, Jack was interrogated for 2 hours. He had to explain his proposal to Dr. Robert in detail, show all the evidence he had gathered, and justify every one of his actions. The detective conducting the interrogation seemed genuinely confused by the case. "Son," he said, "do you understand that proposing a settlement based on compromising information could be interpreted as extortion?" "I do," Jack answered, "but I also know all the information I used was public and true. I didn't make anything up." "But you threatened to make that information public if there was no settlement." "True information is already public by nature. I just offered not to actively spread it." Jack could see the detective was impressed by his legal knowledge, but also concerned about the situation. "Jack, you need to understand you're dealing with very powerful people. They have the means to make your life very difficult." "I know," Jack said, "but I can't let them destroy my family." After 4 hours at the station, Jack was released without formal charges. The detective concluded there was no crime in the settlement proposal, just a legal misunderstanding. But Anthony's message had been clear. He had the power to turn Jack into a criminal suspect at any moment. When Jack got home, he found Emma Rose hugging their mother on the couch, both in tears. "Jack," Emma Rose cried, running to embrace him. "I thought I'd never see you again." "It's okay, Emma," Jack said, holding his sister. "It was just a misunderstanding." But Jack knew it wasn't okay. Anthony had shown he was willing to use even the police to intimidate a 12-year-old. That night, Dr. Fiona went to the Wilson family's home for an emergency meeting. "Jack," she said, "maybe we should step back a little. Anthony is escalating this dangerously." "I can't back down," Jack replied. "If I do now, he'll know he can intimidate me, and he'll try to intimidate anyone who stands up to him. But you're a child. You shouldn't be facing this alone." "I'm not alone," Jack said, looking at his mother and sister. "I have my family, and now I have you too." Dr. Fiona sighed. "All right, but we'll do this the right way. No more direct proposals or informal negotiations. Everything goes through legal channels," Jack agreed. He had learned that sometimes doing the right thing wasn't enough. You had to do it the right way too. In the following weeks, the legal battle intensified. Anthony filed 2 more lawsuits, one challenging Jack's competence to represent his family, and another seeking an injunction to keep him from approaching potential witnesses. Jack found himself involved in 3 simultaneous legal cases, all requiring his presence at hearings, technical responses, and increasingly in-depth legal knowledge. The pressure was starting to affect his school performance. Jack missed classes to attend hearings, and when he was present, he struggled to concentrate. It was Emma Rose who first noticed how much her brother was suffering. "Jack," she said one night after dinner, "you've changed." "Changed how?" "Sadder. You don't play anymore, you don't smile anymore. It's like you became an adult overnight." Jack looked at his little sister and saw genuine concern in her eyes. Emma Rose was only 8 years old, but she understood something was wrong. "It's just that I have to take care of you all," Jack said. "It's my responsibility to protect our family." "But you're part of the family too," Emma Rose replied. "Who's going to take care of you?" His sister's question touched a wound Jack didn't even know he had. He had taken on so many responsibilities that he had forgotten how to be a child. That night, Jack broke down. After everyone had gone to sleep, he locked himself in the bathroom and cried for an hour. He cried for his lost childhood, for the constant pressure, for the fear of failing his family. When he came out, he found his mother waiting in the kitchen with a cup of warm milk. "Sit here, my son," Susan said. Jack sat beside his mother, his eyes still red. "Jack, I'm so sorry about all this," Susan said. "You shouldn't be going through this at your age." "I have to, Mum. If I don't fight, no one will fight for us." "Son, I know you're very smart and brave, but you're also a child. And children need to be protected, not to protect others." Jack drank the warm milk in silence, feeling his mother's affection. "Jack," Susan continued, "if you want to give up, I'll understand. We'll find another way to resolve this." "I can't give up, Mom," Jack replied. "Not after everything we've been through. We're so close to winning." "How can you be sure?" Jack thought about the question. The truth was he wasn't sure of anything. But he had something Anthony didn't. The strength that comes from fighting for something bigger than yourself. "Because we're right," Jack finally said. "And in the end, the truth always wins." Susan hugged her son, wishing she could protect him from all that pain. But she knew Jack had grown beyond his years, and trying to stop him now would be like trying to hold back a force of nature. The next morning, Jack woke with renewed determination. He had cried, he had felt fear, he had questioned his choices. But now he was ready to keep fighting. The next hearing would be decisive. The judge would decide if Jack could continue representing the family, if the witnesses could testify, and if the adverse possession case would proceed. Jack spent the week preparing like never before. He studied case law, memorized legal statutes, and rehearsed his arguments until they were perfect. The night before the hearing, Jack did something he hadn't done in months. He played with Emma Rose. They put together a puzzle, told jokes, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. "Jack," Emma Rose said before bed, "are you going to win tomorrow?" "I'll do my best," Jack replied. "That's enough," Emma Rose said, "because your best is better than anyone else's best." Jack smiled. His little sister had given him exactly the words he needed to hear. On the morning of the decisive hearing, Jack dressed with the same care as a soldier preparing for battle. A neatly pressed light blue shirt, dress pants his mother had bought on sale, and shoes that were a little too big, but the only dress shoes they had. At the courthouse, Jack saw that Anthony had brought not just Mr. Robert Harris, but 2 other lawyers as well. It was a show of force, an attempt to intimidate through sheer legal representation. On Jack's side, there were only him, his mother, and Dr. Fiona. But there were also the 3 witnesses who had agreed to testify: Mrs. Constance, Mr. Walter, and Mrs. Margaret Johnson. The judge entered, and Jack felt this would be the most important moment of his life. Everything he had fought for, studied and suffered for, would be decided in the next few hours. "Let's begin with the issue of representation," said the judge. "Mr. Robert, what is your objection to the minor Jack Wilson representing his family?" "Your Honor, a 12-year-old lacks the legal capacity for complex procedural acts. He's taking on responsibilities that could harm his own family's interests," Jack stood to respond. "Your Honor, the Child and Adolescent Protection Act in Article 111, Section 5 guarantees a child's right to legal defense. But when there are no resources to hire legal counsel, Article 227 of the Constitution guarantees the fundamental right to housing and dignity. Furthermore, Jack continued, the Civil Procedure Code in Article 75 allows a party to represent themselves if they demonstrate adequate legal knowledge. The judge made a few notes. Jack, can you demonstrate your legal knowledge by answering some technical questions? Of course, Your Honor. What's the difference between ordinary and extraordinary adverse possession? Jack took a deep breath. It was a question he had studied many times. Ordinary adverse possession requires title and good faith, with a 10-year period for urban properties. Extraordinary adverse possession requires neither title nor good faith, but has a 15-year period, which can be reduced to 10 if there's residence or productive investments on the property. And which applies to your family's case? Extraordinary, Your Honor. My family has lived on the property for over 10 years, always made improvements and paid taxes. It constitutes posse ad usucapionem. The judge seemed impressed by Jack's technical answer. Mr. Robert, do you maintain your objection? Anthony's lawyer hesitated. It was clear Jack had demonstrated sufficient legal knowledge. I do, Your Honor. Theoretical knowledge doesn't replace practical experience. Objection overruled, said the judge. The minor has demonstrated adequate knowledge and is assisted by the Public Defender's Office. He may continue representing his family. Jack felt his first victory, but he knew the real battle was just beginning. Now let's move to the defamation claims, said the judge. Mr. Robert, what are the specific accusations you consider defamatory? Your Honor, the Wilson family accused my client of dishonesty, deceiving the elderly, and forging documents. These accusations were made publicly without evidence, damaging Mr. Anthony's professional reputation. Jack stood again. Your Honor, these weren't baseless accusations. We have evidence that Mr. Anthony uses questionable methods in his real estate dealings. What evidence? Asked the judge. I'd like to call Mrs. Constance to testify. The elderly woman stood, trembling and clearly nervous. Jack approached her gently. Mrs. Constance, can you tell the judge how you sold your house to Mr. Anthony? Kindly, sir, he told me my house was condemned, Mrs. Constance said weakly, that if I didn't sell quickly I'd face heavy fines. Was that true? No, dear. After I sold it, I found out my house was in perfect condition. There was never any notice from the city. Mr. Roberts stood. Objection, the witness may be confused. The elderly often have memory issues. Jack felt a wave of indignation. Your Honor, this objection is prejudiced and disrespectful. Mrs. Constance is mentally sound and reporting concrete facts. I agree, said the judge. Go on, Mrs. Constance. He sent letters every week, the elderly woman continued, always with scary stories, that the neighborhood would lose value, that they were going to build a prison nearby, that the city was planning construction that would cause a lot of disturbance. Do you have these letters, ma'am? Mrs. Constance opened her purse and pulled out an envelope full of papers. I brought them all, young man. Jack handed the letters to Judge Miller. As she read them, he called Mr. Walter to testify. The elderly man told a similar story. Psychological pressure, false information about property devaluation, artificial urgency to force the sale. Mr. Walter, Jack asked, do you regret selling? Very much, the old man replied, with tears in his eyes. I sold a lot worth $50,000 for just $10,000. I lost the house where I was born, where I raised my children, all because of that man's lies. When Jack called Mrs. Margaret Johnson, who had resisted Anthony's pressure, the full picture became clear. Mrs. Margaret, can you tell us how Mr. Anthony tried to buy your house? For 2 years, he kept showing up at my door with different stories, she said. Once he claimed they were going to build an overpass right in front of my house. Another time he said the neighborhood would turn into a commercial zone and I'd have problems with noise. Always trying to scare me. Why didn't you believe him? Because my son is a lawyer. He taught me to always verify information before making big decisions. When the 3 witnesses finished testifying, the room fell completely silent. Even Mr. Robert Harris seemed uneasy with the accounts. Your Honor, Jack said, as you can see, these weren't baseless accusations. This was the exposure of a pattern of behavior confirmed by multiple witnesses. The judge looked sternly at Anthony Thompson. "Mr. Anthony, would you like to comment on these testimonies?" Anthony stood up nervously. "Your Honor, all my business dealings were legal. If people misunderstood my offers, that wasn't my intention." "Mr. Anthony," Jack said, "how do you explain telling Mrs. Constance her house was condemned when it wasn't?" There may have been a misunderstanding." "And how do you explain telling Mr. Walter the neighborhood would lose value when it actually appreciated 50% in the last 2 years?" Anthony couldn't answer. He was clearly lost. Jack saw it was time for the final blow. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to present one more piece of evidence." Jack pulled out the recording Joseph Green had made of his conversation with Anthony. This recording proves Mr. Anthony knowingly lied to Mr. Joseph, claiming my grandmother had died without heirs when he knew that wasn't true. The recording played again, and Anthony's voice echoed through the room. "The woman who lived there died and left no family. The city's already looking to seize it for abandonment. Mr. Anthony," the judge said, "this recording completely contradicts your claim of good faith." Anthony was visibly defeated. Mr. Robert Harris tried one last move. "Your Honor, even if there were irregularities in the methods, that doesn't change the fact my client has legal ownership documents." Jack had been waiting for this argument. "Mr. Robert," he said, "documents obtained through fraud have no legal validity. Article 166 of the Civil Code is clear. Legal transactions are void when substantial deceit is involved." "Furthermore," Jack continued, "Article 1028 of the Civil Code states that an owner has the right to use, enjoy, and dispose of their property. But the fourth paragraph of the same article specifies that property rights must be exercised in line with economic and social purposes." "Where are you going with this, Jack?" the judge asked. "I mean that a property obtained through deceit to harm a family that had peaceful and undisturbed possession does not fulfill its social function. Therefore, it does not deserve legal protection." Jack's argument was so solid that even Dr. Roberts seemed impressed. It was a sophisticated argument, combining civil law with constitutional principles. Judge Barbara paused to review all the evidence presented. The silence in the room was tense, with everyone awaiting the decision. "Considering all the evidence presented," the judge finally said, "it is clear that there was fraud in Mr. Anthony Thompson's real estate transactions. The accusations made by the Wilson family do not constitute slander, but rather the exposure of proven facts." Jack felt his heart race. It was working. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I dismiss the claim for emotional damages. Furthermore, I order the annulment of the second property sale due to substantial fraud, restoring the previous situation. As for the adverse possession claim," the judge said, "considering that the Wilson family has had peaceful and undisturbed possession for over 10 years, with property improvements and tax payments, I recognize their right to extraordinary adverse possession." Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. They had won on every point. "Finally," the judge concluded, "I order Mr. Anthony Thompson to pay court costs and direct that his conduct be investigated for possible fraud against the elderly." The judge's gavel struck firmly, sealing Jack and his family's victory. The room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Constance was crying with emotion. Mr. Walter applauded. Mrs. Margaret Johnson smiled with satisfaction. Jack turned to his mother and saw her crying, but they were tears of joy and pride. "My son," she whispered, hugging Jack, "you did it. You saved our family." Emma Rose ran to join the hug, shouting with happiness, "Jack, Jack, you're the best brother in the world!" But Jack looked at Anthony Thompson and saw the man glaring at him with pure hatred. The legal battle was over, but Jack knew Anthony wouldn't easily forget that humiliation. On the other side of the room, Dr. Robert gathered his papers with a defeated expression. All three of Anthony's lawyers looked embarrassed by the loss. Dr. Fiona approached Jack with a proud smile. "Jack, you were brilliant," she said. "I've never seen such a well-constructed defense, especially from someone so young." "Thank you, Dr. Fiona," Jack replied. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "Don't underestimate your own merit. You studied, prepared, and presented arguments worthy of experienced lawyers." Joseph Green walked up to the group, leaning on his cane. "Son," he said, "you gave me the chance to right a wrong. Now I can sleep in peace, knowing I did the right thing." "Mr. Joseph, you were brave to come testify," Jack replied. "It made all the difference." When the family finally left the courthouse, Jack felt a mix of relief, exhaustion, and fulfillment. They had fought against all odds and won. Outside, Emma Rose took Jack's hand. "Jack, now that you've won, will you go back to being a kid?" Jack smiled at his little sister. "I'll try, Emma. I'll try." But Jack knew he had changed forever. He had seen the world through adult eyes, faced responsibilities no child should have to bear. There was no going back to lost innocence. That night, the family dined with more joy than they had felt in months. Susan had bought a cake to celebrate, and they laughed and talked late into the evening. "Jack," Susan said during dessert, "what do you want to do now?" "Go back to school like normal," Jack replied. "And maybe, when I grow up, become a real lawyer." "You're already a real lawyer in my heart," said Emma Rose. Jack hugged his sister, feeling for the first time in months that he could relax, that he could go back to being, at least in part, a child. But 3 days later, Jack discovered that the victory in court was only the beginning of a new phase of the battle. Anthony Thompson hadn't given up. He had simply changed his strategy. Jack was at school when the principal called him in for a talk. In the office, he found a man who introduced himself as an inspector from the Department of Education. "Jack Wilson?" the man asked. "Yes, sir. We've received reports that you've been missing a lot of classes to get involved in legal matters. That's very concerning for a child your age." Jack immediately realized this was another one of Anthony's attempts to attack him from a different angle. "Sir," Jack said, "I have justifications for all my absences, and my grades are still good." "But Jack, children should focus on their studies, not adult problems. We're considering transferring you to a school with specialized psychological support." The threat was clear. If Jack didn't stop involving himself in legal issues, he would be separated from his family under the pretense of special care. "Can I talk to my parents before any decision is made?" Jack asked. "Of course, but we want a quick resolution." Jack left school with a familiar feeling of being pressured. Anthony had lost the legal battle, but he was using other fronts to attack. At home, Jack told his mother and Dr. Fiona, who had become a family friend, everything. "This is harassment," Dr. Fiona said. "We'll file a lawsuit for emotional distress." "No," Jack replied. "That's exactly what Anthony wants. He wants to keep us on the defensive, always reacting to his attacks." "Then what do you suggest?" Jack thought for a moment. "We'll ignore it. I'll go back to being a normal student, get excellent grades, and prove this whole situation hasn't harmed me educationally. And if they insist on transferring you, then we'll present my school records, my grades, and witnesses to show I'm an exemplary student. It'll be hard to justify transferring a child who's doing well in school." Jack's strategy worked. In the following weeks, he focused completely on his studies, participated in all school activities, and showed he was perfectly adjusted. When the inspector returned a month later, he found a completely different Jack, cheerful, engaged, with excellent grades and praise from all his teachers. "How are you feeling, Jack?" the inspector asked. "Very well, sir. I'm happy to focus on my studies again. And your family's legal issues. They've been resolved. Now I can go back to being a kid." The inspector found no justification for the transfer, and the case was dropped. But Anthony tried once more. 2 weeks later, a city inspector showed up at the Wilson family's home, claiming a complaint about construction irregularities. Jack didn't panic. He had learned that every attack from Anthony followed the same pattern, using official institutions to pressure the family. "Sir," Jack said politely, "all the improvements to the house were done with permits. My grandmother always kept the city paperwork." Jack showed all the permits his grandmother had obtained over the years for small renovations and upgrades. "Besides," Jack continued, "the house was built in 1984, before the law requiring approved plans for small constructions." The inspector examined the documents and found no irregularities. Another one of Anthony's attempts had failed. That night, Jack talked to his family about the situation. "He'll never give up," Susan said, worried. Yes, he will, Jack replied. He's wasting money and time on attacks that don't work. He'll give up eventually. How can you be sure? Because now we know how he operates. He uses intimidation and psychological pressure. But when that fails, he's out of options. Jack was right. In the following weeks, Anthony's attacks became less frequent and less effective. The man was realizing the Wilson family wouldn't be intimidated. 2 months after their court victory, Jack could finally say the war was over. Anthony Thompson abandoned all appeals and pressure attempts. The house was legally registered under the Wilson family's name. Adverse possession had been granted, and Jack could finally be a child again. But the experience had changed Jack deeply. He'd discovered a passion for law, an ability to fight for justice, and a maturity few adults possessed. At the end of the school year, Jack was the top student in his class. He received an honorable mention for academic excellence and was invited to join a special program for gifted students. At the awards ceremony, Jack stepped onto the stage to receive his medal. In the audience, he saw his mother crying with pride and Emma Rose cheering enthusiastically. "Jack Wilson," said the school principal. "At 12 years old, you've proven age is no barrier to greatness. Your dedication to studies and your maturity are exemplary." Jack politely thanked them, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of his grandmother, who'd worked so hard to provide a home for their family. He was thinking of Miss Constance, Mr. Walter, and all the elderly people Anthony had deceived. He was thinking of justice that doesn't always come on its own, but can be achieved when someone has the courage to fight for it. After the ceremony, Dr. Fiona approached the family. "Jack," she said, "I have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" "How about working with me during summer break? I have several cases involving families in situations like yours. You could help, learn more about law, and make a difference in people's lives." Jack looked at his mother, who smiled and nodded. "I'd love to," Jack replied. That summer, Jack volunteered as an assistant at the public defender's office. He helped 3 families resolve eviction issues, advised 2 elderly women about property rights, and observed 4 court hearings. At one hearing, Jack saw Anthony Thompson again. The man was being sued by one of the families Jack had helped. When Anthony spotted Jack, he averted his eyes, clearly embarrassed. Jack felt no anger or desire for revenge, only deep sadness for a man who'd chosen to use his knowledge to harm others rather than help. By summer's end, Jack had found his calling. He'd become a lawyer, not for money or status, but to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Emma Rose, now 9, asked her brother, "Jack, do you still want to be a lawyer when you grow up?" "Yes," Jack answered with a smile. "I already am a lawyer. When I grow up, I'll be an even better one." And Jack was right. In the following years, he continued studying law independently, assisting Dr. Fiona whenever possible, and building a reputation in town as the boy who knew the law. By 15, Jack had helped over 20 families resolve legal issues. At 18, he aced his law school entrance exams. 5 years later at graduation, Jack was chosen as class speaker in Phi. His address, he spoke about justice, courage, and the responsibility to use knowledge to protect the vulnerable. In the audience, Susan and Emma Rose wept with pride. Beside them stood Mrs. Helen, the librarian who had allowed Jack to study law at the age of 12. And there was also Dr. Fiona, who had become not just a mentor, but a second mother to Jack. "My dear colleagues," said Jack, concluding his speech, "we study law not to enrich ourselves, but to enrich society. Not to gain power, but to give power to those who have none. The law exists to protect the weak from the strong, and we are the guardians of that protection." Applause echoed through the auditorium. Jack looked at the audience and saw moved faces, people who believed, just as he did, that the law could make the world fairer. After graduation, Jack opened a small law firm specializing in family law and real estate matters. His first client was Mrs. Constance, who was having trouble with the new apartment she lived in. "Jack," she said, "when you were 12 and helped me against that awful man, I thought you were an angel. Now I know you're something better, a real lawyer." Jack smiled, remembering how it had all begun. A 12-year-old boy in a courtroom. standing up to powerful men to protect his family. 5 years after opening his firm, Jack had become one of the most respected lawyers in town. He wasn't the wealthiest, but he was the most sought after by those in vulnerable situations. Emma, Rose, now 19 and a journalism student, often accompanied her brother to court to write articles about social justice. "Jack," she said after a particularly difficult hearing, "do you remember that day in court when you were 12? How could I forget? Did you know back then that you were going to win?" Jack thought about the question. He remembered the fear. He had felt the pressure, the sense of facing something much bigger than himself. "No," he answered honestly. "I didn't know if I would win, but I knew I had to try. And if you had lost, I would have tried again and again, until I won." Emma Rose smiled, recognizing in her grown brother the same determination the 12-year-old boy had shown. That night, Jack returned home, where he still lived with his mother and sister, the same house he had fought so hard for years before. Susan had retired and now tended a small garden in front of the house. Emma Rose studied at the public university and dreamed of becoming an investigative journalist. At dinner, as they did every night, the family talked about their days, their plans, their dreams. "Jack," Susan said, "sometimes I wonder how different our lives would be if you hadn't been so brave that day." "I wasn't brave, Mom," Jack replied. "I was just a boy who didn't want to lose his family." "That's the definition of courage," Emma Rose said. "Doing what needs to be done even when you're afraid." Jack looked around the table at the two women he loved more than anything in the world. He looked at the house he had saved, which was now truly theirs forever, and he felt deep gratitude for having had the chance to fight for what mattered. 10 years after that day in court, Jack still remembered the words he had said to Emma Rose when she asked if they were going to lose the house. "We're not losing it, Emma, I promise." It had been a child's promise, made with his heart, with no guarantee it could be kept, but it had been fulfilled through hard work, study, courage, and above all, love for his family. Jack Wilson, the boy who had stood up to seasoned lawyers to protect his home, had become a man who dedicated his life to protecting other families. And whenever he saw a child being underestimated by adults, whenever he witnessed someone powerful trying to intimidate someone vulnerable, Jack remembered that day in court. He remembered Dr. Richard laughing at him, the disdain in Anthony Thompson's eyes, the feeling of being alone against the world. And he also remembered the strength he had found within himself, the determination he had discovered, the justice he had fought for. Because sometimes Jack knew the truth needs someone brave enough to defend it, and age doesn't matter when the heart is in the right place. Years later, when Jack had become an experienced and respected lawyer, he established a tradition at his firm. Every December, he offered free legal consultations for struggling families in town. On one of those days, a woman walked into the office accompanied by a boy of about 10. She explained she was being evicted from her home by a real estate company that claimed to have property documents. "Mr. Jack," the woman said, "I don't have money to pay a lawyer, but I heard you sometimes help people like me." Jack looked at the boy, who was silent, but watching everything carefully. There was something in the child's gaze that reminded him of himself years ago. "What's your name?" Jack asked the boy. "Matthew," the boy replied. "Matthew, do you understand what's happening with your family?" "I do. There are some men trying to take our house. My mom works hard to pay the bills, but they say the house isn't ours." Jack felt a tightness in his chest. It was like looking into the past. "Matthew," Jack said, "do you want to help your mom solve this problem?" The boy nodded eagerly. "Then let's study together. I'll teach you about property rights and you'll help me understand your family's case better." In the following weeks, Jack worked on Matthew's family's case, but always included the boy in the process. He explained legal procedures, showed him documents, and taught him basic legal concepts. Matthew proved to be an exceptional student, absorbing information with impressive speed. Jack saw in the boy the same hunger for knowledge he himself had felt years ago. The case was resolved in favor of Matthew's family. The real estate company had falsified documents and was forced to pay compensation as well as drop the eviction. At the final hearing, Matthew accompanied Jack and his mother. When the judge asked if they had anything to add, Matthew asked to speak. "Your Honor," the boy said firmly, "I learned that the law exists to protect people who need protection. My family needed it, and Mr. Jack helped us. When I grow up, I want to help other families too." Jack felt tears in his eyes. It was like hearing an echo of his own story. After the hearing, Jack spoke with Matthew and his mother. "Matthew," Jack said, "would you like to keep studying law?" "I'd love to." "Then how about coming to my office every Saturday? We can study together and you can help me with other cases." Matthew's mother began to cry. "Mr. Jack, how can I ever thank you for everything you've done for us?" "No need to thank me," Jack replied. "Someone once did the same for me when I was Matthew's age. Now it's my turn to pass it on." Over the next few years, Jack mentored Matthew just as Dr. Fiona had mentored him. The boy became an informal assistant at the firm, learning procedures, studying case law, and observing cases. When Matthew turned 18, he passed the law school entrance exam at the same university Jack had attended, and when he graduated, he opened his own practice in partnership with Jack, specializing in children's and adolescents' rights. On the day the new firm, Wilson and Harris Law Firm, opened, Jack gave a short speech to the guests. "Many years ago," he said, "a 12-year-old boy walked into a courtroom not knowing if he could save his family. Today, that same courtroom is our second home, and our mission is to make sure other children don't have to face alone what I faced." Jack looked at the audience and saw familiar faces. His mother, Susan, now with white hair but a youthful smile; Emma Rose, now a renowned journalist covering social justice issues; Dr. Fiona, who had become like an aunt to him; Mrs. Helen, the retired librarian who had opened the doors of knowledge for him. And he also saw new faces, other young people. Matthew had begun mentoring families who had been helped by the law firm, fellow attorneys who admired the social work they did. "The law," Jack continued, "isn't just a profession, it's a responsibility. A responsibility to use our knowledge to balance the unbalanced, to give voice to the voiceless, to protect what needs protection." Applause echoed through the room. Jack looked at Matthew, now a young lawyer full of ideals and determination, and saw the continuation of his own story. Because sometimes, Jack had learned, a person can change not only their own life, but create ripples that transform the lives of many others. And sometimes, knowledge shared generously multiplies in ways we can't even imagine. That evening, Jack returned home, where Susan had prepared a special dinner to celebrate. Emma Rose had brought her boyfriend, a photographer who documented social issues. Matthew had been invited to dine with the family, as he always was on special occasions. During dessert, Emma Rose asked a question she had held onto for years. "Jack, do you regret losing your childhood to fight for our family?" Jack thought for a moment, savoring the dessert Susan had made especially for the occasion. "Emma," he finally replied, "I didn't lose my childhood. I used it the best way I could, and if I could go back in time, I'd do it all over again. Even knowing the suffering you went through, especially because of it. The suffering taught me compassion. The struggle taught me perseverance. Fear taught me courage." Matthew, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke. "Mr. Jack, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Matthew." "What would you say to that 12-year-old boy if you could talk to him today?" Jack smiled, picturing the boy he had been small, scared, but determined to protect his family. "I'd tell him not to be afraid. I'd tell him it's worth fighting for what's right. And I'd tell him that in the end, everything would turn out okay." "And did it?" Emma Rose asked. Jack looked around the table at the people he loved, in the home he had saved, thinking of the career he had built, helping others. "It did," he answered. "It turned out far better than I could have imagined back then." And it was true. Jack Wilson, the boy who had faced experienced lawyers in court to save his home, had become far more than he could have dreamed. He had become a defender of justice, a protector of the vulnerable, and proof that age is no limitation when the heart is in the right place. But more than that, he had become someone who multiplied hope. Every person he helped, every young person he mentored, every injustice he corrected was a seed planted for a fairer world. And sometimes, Jack knew, that is the greatest victory of all. Not just winning your own battles, but helping others win theirs. The end. Now tell us what you thought of Jack and his family's story. Do you think a 12-year-old could really face experienced lawyers like Jack did? Share your thoughts on courage, determination, and justice in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.